From in and around the Capital Region on the Alive Radio Network, this is The Matter at Hand. I'm Alicia Purdy.
My husband just passed, so it's kind of I'm still trying to get through losing him in daily life.
Victoria St. Arnold lost her husband to a drug overdose after he'd suffered with chronic pain stemming from a series of spinal surgeries. When opioid prescription drugs were no longer available to help him manage his pain, he turned to the street for his pills and instead accidentally ingested fentanyl, a drug that is 100 times more potent than morphine and is rapidly growing in use across the U.S. St. Arnold's husband was unable to break away from his addiction, and she says she actively fought to help him.
I think they need to know that they're loved, but you still have to be firm. You can't just allow certain behaviors because it's harmful to everybody.
It's an epidemic within a pandemic. Substance abuse and drug overdoses have surged across the U.S. as a result of coronavirus-induced isolation, but there also appears to be a correlation between stimulus payments and overdoses. According to the CDC, the estimated final 2020 total of drug overdose deaths in the United States could exceed 90,000, compared to 70,000 in 2019 as the pandemic drove those already in the shadows further into isolation, economic fragility, and fear, while at the same time disconnecting them from the treatment and support systems that might save them. Albany County reported 16 drug overdoses in just the first week of April. Victor Harris is the director of Albany Adult and Teen Challenge, and he says the trends are alarming.
We can look at the numbers from August of 2019 to August of 2020. Our nation experienced 84,000 deaths from overdose, which is the highest number in a year since they've been recording that statistic. It's almost like the perfect storm.
County officials across the U.S. are reporting recent spikes in fatal and non-fatal overdoses, as well as in emergency room visits related to drugs. The third round of stimulus payments was approved March 17th, and within days, 5 people in Erie County in western New York died of overdoses within a 24-hour period. Similar stories are pouring in from across the country as states wrestle with drugs flooding across the southern border and coming into the U.S. to be mixed with other substances, drastically increasing the likelihood of an overdose. In March of 2020, as the pandemic shut down restaurants, bars, workplaces, and schools across New York State, officials saw a drastic rise in cocaine overdoses, many of which were involved in cocaine laced with fentanyl. Opioids accounted for around 75% of all overdose deaths during the early months of the pandemic. Around 80% of those included synthetic opioids.
For some people, money is definitely a trigger. The reality for the active addict, $1,400 is not going to last you very long. But the idea, it's a strong pull. Some people, that is their trigger. Money in the bank or money in the pocket. I had a student who was with us for 10 months, only had another 2 months to finish the program. And because of having that resource in the bank, made the decision to walk out the door.
States like West Virginia and Kentucky have long been at the heart of the opioid epidemic, and that region is still reporting some of the largest proportional increases. Lauren Cummings, executive director of the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Abuse Coalition in West Virginia, said they believe there's a clear correlation between the recent stimulus checks that were sent out and the overdoses occurring after the fact. And she said there was also an increase in overdoses after the first round of stimulus payouts. Annually, substance abuse centers also see an increase in overdoses following tax returns. According to Cummings, the stimulus payments on top of the isolation brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic have been a deadly combination. She said their hope is that people recognize that money is a trigger for them, and that her recommendation is people either have a family member hold on to their funding or that they put it into an account that they don't have direct access to right away. Going forward, their recommendation is people commit to putting their stimulus money toward useful purchases or investments such as cars, or even consider giving it to people who could use the financial support. The Drug Free America Foundation said in a statement, in light of the widespread isolation, uncertainty, and despair, the coronavirus stimulus checks, though essential for our economy, add an additional layer of complexity to the issues, as many will be tempted to spend that money on substances in order to cope with the mounting pressures posed by the pandemic. The foundation also said it's especially worrying for those in recovery from opioid addiction, as they are most likely to die from a drug overdose during a relapse due to diminished tolerance. Justin Withrow is the director of the Anchor Project, a residential Bible-based addiction recovery program, and he says the stimulus checks are definitely part of a growing trend of rising drug use and relapses among residents in recovery homes, and that in terms of opioid addiction, a relapse can be immediately fatal, as the body cannot tolerate the powerful drugs after living off of them, even for a brief amount of time.
What they don't understand is that I think every addict has a relapse in them, but not every addict will have another chance at recovery. And then whenever they leave this program and they go out, and usually they pick up at the same amount that they left off, and those people risk of a fatal overdose is extremely higher than the people that are actually using every day.
With an influx of cash and a decrease in the street cost of heroin, as well as an increase in the availability of fentanyl, the rise in drug overdoses is as disheartening as it is scary, compounded by the increased rates of depression and anxiety, as COVID-19 fears continue to plague people from all walks of life. Even though COVID-19 cases continue to decrease across the country, studies are showing that people who have been vaccinated are still afraid to go out. Gary Schmidt, Chief Operating Officer at Valley Healthcare System in West Virginia, which serves as a substance abuse counseling center, said he thinks COVID-19 has been too politicized and it's caused a large amount of suffering, causing people to turn to drugs and alcohol in increasing numbers in order to cope with the stress, using their stimulus checks to finance their addictions. Teen Challenge's Victor Harris said that for people struggling with addiction, even Christians, the temptation may always be there.
Sin hasn't changed. The nature of sin hasn't changed. And so the temptation to sin, the enemy is aggressive in his pursuit of your life. He knows that he can't do anything about your salvation, but his design and his purpose and what he desires to do is to make you as ineffective a Christian as possible, even if that means you sitting on a slab in a morgue.
President Joe Biden, whose own son Hunter has publicly struggled with drug addiction, campaigned on a platform to address the opioid crisis through a public health approach that includes expanding funding and resources, reforming the criminal justice system, increasing insurance coverage, and widening access to medication-assisted treatment and mental health care. Yet in spite of the drug issues plaguing his own family, the president has been vocal about his support of decriminalizing drug use and addressing drug abuse from a mental health perspective, as well as legalizing marijuana, considered to be a gateway drug, a move which was just signed into law in New York State.
I don't believe anybody should be going to jail for drug use. They should be going into mandatory rehabilitation. We should be building rehab centers to have these people housed. We should we should decriminalize marijuana, wipe out the record so you can actually say in honesty, you ever been arrested for anything, you can say no.
Already, the Biden administration is under pressure to do more than the president has already done, while as of yet, there has been no meaningful movement on those campaign promises, as the nightmare scenario at the U.S. southern border continues to play out, pulling the president's attention away from the opioid crisis, which has upset those waiting on Biden's promises, who point out that he has failed to use his executive orders or any other policy announcement to focus attention on overdose deaths the way he has done with other issues like energy, climate change, immigration, and abortion. However, Teen Challenge's Victor Harris said there is a path forward for those who are struggling or have even relapsed. The advice he gives to the residents at Albany Adult and Teen Challenge is this.
What I would say to anybody who's struggling right now is the same steps that you took to get out of that bondage are the same steps you need to take to get out of it again. And if you're struggling with going back, just know that the power of Christ and the power of the Spirit of God is more than able to keep you standing if you're willing to yield and submit your life to Him. Stop allowing your flesh and your emotions to take you places where you don't want to go.
Families and friends of drug-addicted people often feel helpless when it comes to addressing drug addiction and watching their loved ones struggle and even die from a drug overdose. With economic shutdowns still in place in many areas across the U.S., as well as fear stemming from COVID-19 misinformation or experiences, many people struggling with drug use haven't had access to the in-person services they need to help them through their crisis or to hold them accountable and to separate them from their drug connections like dealers. Dr. Nora Volkow, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, says stress is the strongest predictor of whether one will or will not turn to drugs to cope. And she says one of the strongest support systems that we have are actually our social relationships. She says it's not quite the same as being able to see someone and be close to them, but virtual relationships and check-ins are still very valuable to being able to communicate with others and provide support. A set of experiments conducted by Dr. Bruce Alexander in the 1970s, known as Rat Park, revealed a new understanding that addiction is about far more than any drug, and in fact, that a person themselves is an active ingredient in their own interactions with drugs. Researchers had already proved that when rats were placed in a cage all alone with no other community of rats and offered 2 water bottles, one filled with water and the other filled with heroin or cocaine water, the rats would repetitively drink from the drug-laced bottles until they had all overdosed and died. But Dr. Alexander wondered, were those results about the drug, or might it be related to the setting they were in? To test his hypothesis, Alexander put rats in rat parks where they were among other rats and free to roam and play and to socialize, and they were given the same access to the same 2 types of drug-laced bottles. But when inhabiting a rat park, rats remarkably preferred the plain water, and when they did imbibe from the drug-filled bottle, the rats did so intermittently and not obsessively and never overdosed, proving the idea that a social community was instrumental in beating the power of drugs. Citing the Rat Park study, the Drug Free America Foundation issued a call to action for those in the prevention community to develop novel strategies and resources to help vulnerable populations resist the temptation to seek relief in substances, while those in the recovery community seek to reinforce existing support networks, whether virtual or otherwise. Albany Adult and Teen Challenge Director Victor Harris says he works with residents to think of their stimulus money as a way to pay into something they couldn't afford before, but that the recovery industry overall across the country is struggling to help men and women to overcome the temptation to pay into a life of addiction with money funded by the U.S. government, including stimulus money and unemployment checks. According to Harris, the numbers of those seeking help is going down as people simply lack motivation to get their lives back on track, while the money to finance their lifestyles and drug usage keeps rolling in. But Harris says he counsels his residents to keep the bigger picture in mind for their lives and to seek help in pushing past the temptation to turn to drugs to cope. According to Harris, it's important that people trapped in addiction learn the truth, that the struggles and temptations they face were already faced by Jesus Christ and then overcome, a hope they too can have through him.
We have to remember the message of the gospel. It hasn't changed. It's effective. It's powerful. It's not only able to deliver, but it's able to keep. And I remind in the Ministry of Teen Challenge, that is our thrust, to just remember that we need to live a gospel-centered life in knowing that Christ went to the cross for us to free us from the bondage to the dominion of sin. And so if we will allow the flurry of the temptation take its toll, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to lead to sin. So we can stand in the face of the temptation, just like Christ did, all the way to the cross. Then they never have to go back and use again.
To contact Albany Adult and Teen Challenge for help, call 518-694-0455. To locate county programs for addiction, recovery, or prevention, call the 24/7 Capital Region Open Access Engagement Program at 1-866-930-4999. Examining the issues that pertain to the people of God. This is the matter at hand. From in and around the Capital Region on the Alive Radio Network, I'm Alicia Purdy.